Greetings, everybody. Hi, this is Rick Barney. I'm professor of English at the University of Albany, and I am going to just give you some thoughts about one of my favorite monster movies, period, of all time, which is George Romero's Night of the Living Dead. I'm going to do my absolute best not to give anything away, so you won't, have any spoilers here if I can possibly help it. But I'm going to suggest some things to look for or think about that maybe for those of you who decide to do so can join us on Friday for a conversation about what you thought about this film. Night of the Living Dead was not the career path that George Romero intended for himself. Neither did the people who worked with him to make the film, which was put out in 1968. They were a group of people aspiring to make movies, maybe even in Hollywood, during the 1960s, who wanted to make art films, perhaps, or what we would now probably call independent cinema, couldn't get a start anywhere. And so Romero decided to make this small movie, something he thought would be kind of a toss-off, that they hoped would give them funding for getting back to the thing they really wanted to do otherwise. To their surprise, and to the shock of the nation, I guess in some ways, this movie became an underground cult hit. For the times in the 70s and 80s, for instance, no video stores, no DVDs, and all the rest. This became part of what was called the midnight circuit, or the midnight showing. Theaters would screen the film because it was really too much to be done during the usual hours of 8 or 10 or 9 p.m. This is the sort of thing that felt a little bit risky. Only a certain would admit to one another they had gone to see it. And this is a far cry from the world in which we now live, where a zombie film comes out every 10 minutes, it seems. And one of the most popular television shows in the history of the country is about zombies, with at least two spin-offs from, of course, the show that's going on right now in its, I think, 11th season. In any case, Night of the Living Dead is so important, not because of how interestingly it's done on a shoestring budget, but also because of a turn it creates in cinema about zombies. This film has nothing to do, really, ultimately, with its first roots, if you will, which has to do with the Caribbean and the rituals or rites of Voodoo, the Voodoo religion, largely based in Haiti, about which there were loosely based films in the past. One of the most famous ones, of course, is called White Zombie. There was I Walked with a Zombie in the 1950s. There were other films with sort of characters encountering some sort of figures that seemed to be catatonic in some way. These, of course, were wildly European or Anglo-American fantasies about what zombies were or what they might signify, but at least they were based in some degree geographically on encountering really a foreign culture and all of the sort of exotic notions that could spin in Hollywood productions. What Romero does, however, is to basically invent the modern zombie myth of a North American or, quote, Western scenario in which zombies are an entirely different kind of thing about us more than about others, whoever those others may be, or other with a capital O. This notion was with Romero from the very beginning. He developed it and continued to find new threads or aspects of this notion. But now we are dealing with a phenomenon by the myth of this particular strain of thinking, having to do with why we are the way we are and what zombies can tell us about that condition. So this film was produced in 1968. As I say, it was a cult hit. It's part of a trilogy, usually thought of as a trio. The second movie came out as Dawn of the Dead in 1978. And then in 1985, Romero produced Day of the Dead. After that, there was a remake of Night of the Living Dead, this time with Romero only as producer and Tom Savini as a director, which the story is largely the same with very significant changes having to do with Romero's desire to change the representation of gender. especially there. And then there's a sort of a hiatus for Romero until the 2000s, when he once again enters the fray, if you will, being involved with the making of films that include The Land of the Dead, 2005, Diary of the Dead in 2008, and Survival of the Dead in 2009. Of course, there is now just a monstrously large number of zombie films and all the rest all around us, still ongoing. And that's a whole other phenomenon that we could talk about later. But in its first phase, I want you to pay attention, for instance, on what the explanation offered for why this is happening, just the basic quote unquote scientific evidence for what it is that's causing this phenomenon, and whatever it is that we learn about its particular details, or what sort of being this phenomenon creates. That's going to be very distinct from the sorts of narratives that are told from about the late 90s onward. That's a whole other conversation. But let me just turn to the film and offer you 4 things to look for in addition to this issue of origin. First and foremost really has to do with the main character named Ben. Ben is an African-American character with really remarkable density, complicated motivations, and intelligence, unlike perhaps seen ever by American audiences, except for in the 1960s. There's something extremely forward-looking in Romero by casting Ben in this way. So I would simply ask you to pay attention to things like, how is Ben introduced? What kind of role does he play? With whom does he conflict and with whom does he not? And what do you make of how the movie ends regarding him and his fate? Second thing I would suggest, that's of course very much about Romero's interest, the nuclear family. There is one family representing that in this little farmhouse where several people have gathered, helter-skelter, in the midst of an emergency. And that family is Harry and Helen Cooper and their daughter, Karen. What is Romero doing with the so-called nuclear family in this story? What is his perspective on it? What is the film saying? Why are they the way they are? And what do you make of the gender issues or the generational issues that are there in the family? Pay attention to the role of the media. Romero is already in certain ways being self-conscious about how the media represents this sort of thing. So there's a kind of meta level to this. The story itself, in which there are television announcers and all those sorts of things, in which I think Romero's also thinking about what it means to represent this in a culture that is now television saturated. What do the characters do? How does the role of the media work? What do you want to make of that in terms of the overall point that Romero might be making? And then finally, in the vaguest possible way, the ending. So not telling you what's there, but I simply want to mention that the ending is not going to be in moving images. The ending is going to be in a series of stills. What is that about? Why did Romero end the movie that way? What do you make of the series of images that we witness before the screen goes to black? With that said, you have to make up your own mind about these things. I hope I haven't given anything away that will make you too prepared for surprises. But otherwise, in the ghoulish possible way one can offer this, make the most of your enjoyment of Night of the Living Dead.